WNBA finals. And so I'll leave it there. I mean, I'm just obviously disheartened. I'm a human too. I have a family. I have 2 kids who are devastated by these comments. And so all I'll say is just...
We need to talk about what didn't happen this week. Usually, in the world of sports media, the headlines are dominated by what was said, what was signed, and what was broadcast. But right now, the biggest story in the WNBA isn't a buzzer beater or a playoff clinch. It's the sound of silence. It's the story of a massive announcement that was allegedly locked and loaded, ready to fire, only to be dismantled at the very last second by the people sitting in the high tower of the league office. We're talking about Caitlin Clark, a network giant like NBC, and a direct intervention that reportedly stopped a partnership that could have changed the financial landscape of women's basketball forever. For months, the narrative has been that the WNBA is simply going through growing pains, adjusting to an influx of new fans. But this latest move suggests something far more calculated. Reports and insiders are starting to piece together a picture of a league office that may be uneasy about the scale of its own superstar. This isn't just a fumble. It looks like an active suppression of value. The rumors swirling around this blocked NBC announcement aren't just about a TV appearance. They're about control. Who owns Caitlin Clark's voice? Who controls her image? And more importantly, is the WNBA commissioner willing to burn the biggest marketing bridge the league has ever had just to prove that the shield matters more than the player? If you thought the Olympic snub was the peak of the controversy, you may want to buckle up. What's happening behind closed doors regarding NBC media rights and the so-called protection of the league's image appears far more complicated. This is the story of how the WNBA tried to place a ceiling on a star who was born to fly, and why this particular decision might turn into a massive mistake. To understand why this move is such a bombshell, we first have to understand what was allegedly on the table. This wasn't going to be a standard 30-second commercial or a quick interview on the Today Show. The whispers from industry insiders suggest that Clark and NBC were working on something much bigger. A partnership that would have positioned her as a standalone media presence completely independent of the WNBA season. Think along the lines of a dedicated off-season documentary series, exclusive commentary roles, or a branding integration that would make her the face of NBC's basketball coverage heading into the next Olympic cycle. This kind of deal is what people in media call leverage. It's the type of move that takes a player from being an employee of a league to becoming a partner of a major network. And that is exactly what the WNBA front office reportedly couldn't stomach. The timing is suspicious, to say the least. The WNBA recently finalized a historic $2.2 billion media rights deal, and NBC is a major part of that package. The logic from the commissioner's office seems to revolve around a strict interpretation of exclusivity. The rumor is that Commissioner Kathy Engelbert and her team stepped in to enforce a rigid hierarchy. The argument reportedly being that because the league has a deal with NBC, Caitlin Clark shouldn't have a separate individual agreement with the same network that could overshadow the league's own partnership. They're essentially treating the network like league property. Imagine if the NBA told LeBron James he couldn't produce a show for ESPN simply because the NBA airs games on ESPN. It sounds ridiculous, right? That's because it is. But in the WNBA, where the power dynamics are shifting rapidly, the front office appears determined to maintain control. They saw Clark about to reach a level of mainstream visibility that the league itself couldn't fully manage, and they pulled the plug. This leads to the uncomfortable philosophy that seems to be driving many of the league's decisions regarding its rookie sensation, the obsession with equity over excellence. Throughout the season, there has been a noticeable energy from veteran players, media commentators, and even league leadership suggesting that Caitlin Clark must not be allowed to become bigger than the collective. This blocked announcement is a perfect example of that mindset in action. If Clark launches a solo project with NBC, she separates herself from the pack. She becomes a household name in homes that may not even watch basketball. But the WNBA seems determined to market itself as a collective of stars. They want the Big Three or Big Five narrative, making sure that if Clark gets a slice of the pie, players like Angel Reese, Aya Wilson, and Breanna Stewart get one too. While that may sound noble on paper, it can be disastrous from a business standpoint. You don't hide Michael Jordan just to make sure the rest of the Bulls receive equal attention. You ride the rocket ship. By blocking this announcement, the commissioner is essentially enforcing a kind of stardom equality, attempting to level the playing field by pulling the top performer back down. It's a move that many critics say reflects insecurity. The message sent across locker rooms around the league becomes clear. Don't get too big, don't get too ambitious. If you try to outgrow the system will cut you back down. This isn't just frustrating for fans. It risks creating an environment where success is treated with suspicion rather than celebration. And then there's the money, because there's almost always a dollar sign attached to these conflicts. The WNBA's new media rights deal is massive. $2.2 billion over 11 years. It's a transformative amount of money for the league. But who drove that valuation? Who forced networks to finally open their checkbooks? Everyone already knows the answer: Caitlin Clark. The viewership numbers don't lie. When she plays, the cameras show up and the advertisements sell. The irony is hard to ignore. The league is benefiting from the attention Clark generated while simultaneously using that newfound leverage to restrict her opportunities. They are effectively using the NBC partnership, made far more valuable because of the Caitlin Clark effect, as the very reason to block her from working directly with NBC. Some critics call that a parasitic relationship. The host feeds off the energy of the organism while trying to control its movement at the same time. Legal analysts suggest the league may be leaning on conflict of interest clauses, possibly arguing that Clark appearing as an NBC personality could dilute the WNBA product. But that argument reflects an old-school mindset. Because today we live in the era of the influencer athlete. Players are the product. By blocking this announcement, the WNBA appears to be protecting a business model that feels decades out of date. They are trying to control the rights to her image, forcing revenue to pass through the league's filter so an administrative cut can be taken before it ever reaches the player. This isn't just a ban, it feels like a shakedown. We also need to stop pretending this is just about hurt feelings. When you block a major media announcement for an athlete, you are directly affecting their livelihood. You're taking money out of their pocket. Everyone knows WNBA salaries are, frankly, tiny compared to the NBA. Clark's rookie contract is barely a rounding error compared to what top male athletes earn. Like many athletes in her position, she depends heavily on endorsements and media deals to generate her real income. So when the commissioner blocks an announcement involving a giant like NBC, the financial impact is significant. We're not talking about a few $1,000s here. A partnership with NBC could easily reach 7 figures per year. That's generational money. The kind of money that secures a family's future. And yet, for a league that constantly speaks about empowering women financially, it seems remarkably comfortable preventing its most marketable star from maximizing her opportunities. That adds another layer to the situation. It starts to feel personal, almost like a punishment for stepping outside the line. It raises an uncomfortable question. Is the WNBA trying to keep Clark financially dependent on the league? If she's making $20 million a year through outside media partnerships, she no longer needs the league in the same way. She doesn't have to tolerate the hard fouls, the questionable officiating, or the hostile press conferences. She becomes untouchable. And perhaps that's exactly what the commissioner fears. An athlete who becomes too powerful, too independent, and too financially secure to be controlled. This kind of administrative tension doesn't stay confined to boardrooms. It spills directly onto the court. We've seen the physical play all season long. We saw the Kennedy Carter hip check. We saw the intense stare-downs. We've watched aggressive defense that occasionally crosses the line into something more personal. When the league office sends signals that appear to undercut Caitlin Clark, it can embolden players who already feel resentment toward her. Think about the psychology inside a locker room. If the commissioner is blocking Clark's business opportunities, it reinforces the narrative among some veterans that she hasn't earned her status yet. It quietly signals to the rest of the league that targeting the rookie is acceptable. If leadership doesn't fully defend her value, why would opponents treat her differently? That's why this blocked NBC announcement almost functions like a dog whistle. It sends the message, we're not going to let this one player take over the league. And that creates a dangerous cycle. The more the league tries to limit her growth, the more the physical play escalates because players and referees begin operating within an environment that feels openly skeptical of Clark's rise. From a business perspective, it's baffling. The WNBA should be protecting its golden goose, building the brand around her, promoting her globally, and capitalizing on the surge in attention she brings. Instead, critics argue the league is doing the opposite, exposing her to hostility while simultaneously blocking opportunities that could elevate everyone. But here's the twist the league might not be fully calculating. Caitlin Clark has an alternative path. It's called Unrivaled. The new league founded by Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier is offering enormous salaries and equity stakes to players. And what they desperately need right now is star power. If the WNBA continues restricting deals, limiting media access, and allowing a hostile environment around its biggest attraction, Clark suddenly has leverage. She doesn't need to travel overseas in the off-season anymore to earn extra money. Instead of playing in Russia or Turkey, she could stay in Miami, play in Unrivaled, and potentially earn more in a few weeks than she does during an entire WNBA season. The blocked NBC announcement might end up pushing her closer to that door. Because if NBC can't work with her through the WNBA, they might work with her somewhere else. Maybe through Unrivaled. Maybe through independent project. Sports history shows that leagues lose when they underestimate their stars. Just look at the fracture between the PGA Tour and LIV Golf. When athletes feel restricted, they find alternatives. The WNBA risks behaving like a monopoly in a world where monopolies no longer hold absolute power. If Clark decides to prioritize a league that allows her to fully capitalize on her brand, the WNBA could lose the very player responsible for much of its recent surge in interest. And then there's the optics. For years, the WNBA has asked for more attention, more viewers, more coverage, more investment. Now a player arrives who delivers all of that: viewers, headlines, sponsorships, and the response appears to be resistance. Fans notice. Just look at the comment sections across social media. Many discussions have turned into battlegrounds. A growing segment of the fan base is openly pushing a "Free Caitlin" narrative. More and more people are starting to believe that the biggest obstacle to the league's growth isn't lack of interest. It's internal management decisions. By blocking this announcement, what could have been a huge public relations win instead looks like a self-inflicted disaster. Imagine the alternative headline: WNBA star Caitlin Clark partners with NBC for groundbreaking basketball series. That kind of story elevates the entire league. It signals that women's basketball has truly reached the major league stage. Instead, the headline becomes something very different. League blocks stars' opportunity. And that makes the organization appear small, cautious, and unnecessarily restrictive. It feels like a classic case of turning victory into defeat. And it's impossible to discuss this NBC situation without remembering the Olympic roster controversy. When Clark was left off the 2024 Summer Olympics roster, the explanations were familiar. She needed rest. She needed time to develop chemistry. It was about seniority. Many fans believed those explanations were simply public relations cover. Now this NBC situation feels like the sequel to that story. The same leadership structure making another decision that limits her exposure. The Olympic decision kept her off the global stage in Paris. This move potentially blocks her from a massive domestic platform with NBC. The pattern is hard to ignore. It increasingly looks like a deliberate effort to control the scale of her visibility. The real question is why. Is it fear that her popularity exposes gaps elsewhere in the league? Is it concern about maintaining competitive balance? Or is it something simpler, an attempt by executives to reassert authority over a player whose influence grew faster than anyone expected? Whatever the motivation, history suggests these kinds of decisions rarely age well. Just like the Olympic snub sparked backlash, this decision risks alienating the very fans who recently started paying attention to the WNBA. There's another angle to this story. The WNBA might be unintentionally creating a villain, but the role they're filling is their own. In every great sports story, the hero needs an obstacle. Usually that obstacle is another team, like the Detroit Pistons standing in the way of Michael Jordan during his rise. But in this story, the obstacle appears to be the commissioner and the league office itself. The league is starting to position itself as the empire trying to suppress the rising star. That might drive engagement in the short term, because anger generates clicks, but in the long run it damages trust. Fans don't want to support a league that seems to be fighting its own players. They want to see the best athletes succeed. When the administration becomes the antagonist, the sport suffers. The NBC announcement could have been a celebration of basketball. It would have been positive press. Instead, by shutting it down, the league has chosen conflict. And while conflict can attract attention, it also wears audiences down. People are starting to get tired of watching Caitlin Clark appear to battle her own bosses just to move forward in her career. So where does this story go next? Right now the announcement is blocked. The deal appears frozen. And somewhere, lawyers are likely working overtime. But that doesn't mean the situation is finished. In the digital era, information behaves like water. It eventually finds a crack. The leaks are already happening. People know a deal was being discussed. And now the Streisand effect seems to be taking over. By trying to hide the partnership, the WNBA has made it one of the most talked about stories of the week. They've created more curiosity about what Caitlin Clark almost did than about anything the league itself is promoting right now. Clark's team is probably recalculating their next move. They understand the power of public pressure. More reports could surface. More hints might appear online. And the new league, unrivaled, could easily decide to enter the conversation. The WNBA may believe it won this round by slamming the gavel. But it may have just kicked a hornet's nest. In the end, the blocked NBC announcement feels like a symptom of a deeper problem inside the WNBA, an ongoing tension built around control, ego, and insecurity. The league is holding what looks like a winning lottery ticket and using it like a bookmark. Caitlin Clark has brought attention, money, and relevance to a league that had been searching for all three. And yet her rise has been met with hard fouls, media controversies, and now administrative roadblocks tied to her business opportunities. At some point the WNBA will need to make a clear decision. And it may need to make that decision quickly. They can either ride the wave, allow their biggest star to shine while sharing in the unprecedented growth that follows, or they can keep trying to build barriers to slow that momentum. But there's one problem with trying to hold back momentum. It works like water. If you block it long enough, the pressure builds, and eventually the dam breaks. If leadership continues blocking announcements and limiting opportunities, it won't humble Caitlin Clark. It might push her somewhere else. And if the face of the league eventually decides to build her own empire beyond the WNBA, the league could find itself left with nothing but legal clauses, ownership structures, and a lot of empty seats. The clock is ticking, Commissioner. Let the players shine. Let them earn. Or watch them walk away.